Let's put ourselves in someone's shoes for a second. Imagine it's 2022, and you're Tim Cook. For the last 20 years, you've built an absolute empire on the back of one giant factory, China. But now, well, that factory's starting to look a little shaky. You've got COVID lockdowns, you've got geopolitical drama. You need a plan B. You need another country, another place with 1 billion people hungry to grow.
And that, right there, is the question that everyone from Wall Street to Washington is asking right now. Is India, the world's biggest democracy, actually ready to grab the baton from China and become the next great engine for the global economy? I mean, the buzz about India's rise is everywhere. But if you look just beneath the surface, you find a much, much more complicated story.
You see, this isn't about just swapping one country for another. We're talking about two completely different bets. China's whole model was built on this top-down authoritarian efficiency. India's path, well, it's a massive gamble on chaotic democracy, and it's all fueled by this unbelievably young population. It is a high-stakes game with incredible potential for a boom or, well, a spectacular bust.
So how are we going to unpack this huge gamble? Well, we're going to dig into 5 key areas. First, the people. Are they an asset or a liability? Then, the engine. Can this factory dream actually become a reality? Third, the code. Is India's digital leap a path forward or is it a trap? Fourth, the global game. How is India playing its cards as an emerging world power? And finally, the cracks. What are the internal threats that could derail this whole story? All right, first up, the people. You hear this phrase all the time, India's demographic dividend. The idea is that they have all these young people while places like China are getting older. But is this massive youth bulge really a gold mine or is it more of a ticking time bomb?
Just try to get your head around this number. By 2050, India is on track to add 183 million people to its workforce. That's more than the entire current workforce of the United States. In theory, that kind of number should light the fuse on an economic explosion.
But here's the massive catch. A demographic dividend only pays off if those young people actually have jobs. And right now, for recent graduates under 25, the unemployment rate can shoot up to over 40%. You know, having millions of young, educated, and jobless people, that's not a recipe for economic growth. That's a recipe for social unrest.
And if you need one stat to understand the sheer desperation, it's this. A few years back, the Indian Railways posted about 35,000 low-level jobs. 12 million people applied. Think about that. That's like the entire population of Belgium applying for a handful of government jobs. That's the scale of the crisis India has to solve, and fast. So how on earth does India plan to create jobs for all these millions of young people? The big answer, or at least the big hope, is manufacturing. For decades, the model was simple. China made stuff, and India provided services. But to employ hundreds of millions, you need factories. The question is, can India actually build them on the scale that's needed?
For the longest time, the difference was night and day. Trying to ship goods in China was like playing ice hockey. The puck just glides, smooth and predictable. In India, it was an obstacle course. You're dealing with potholes, red tape, corruption, logistics costs that could absolutely kill your business before it even started. But, and this is a big but, that is changing, and it's changing fast. The Indian government is on an absolute infrastructure bender. I mean, they're laying down highways at an incredible pace, building these dedicated freight railways that cut transit times from days down to hours, and they've doubled the number of airports. They are trying to close that gap, and they're spending a fortune to do it. And you know what? It's starting to work. The government's whole Make in India push, offering up cash incentives, is luring in the big players. Just a few years ago, basically 0 iPhones were made in India. Today, that number is around 14%, and it's climbing. This is that China plus one strategy playing out in real time.
But here's where the comparison with China completely falls apart. In an authoritarian state like China, if the government wants your land for a factory, they take it. End of story. In India's messy, chaotic democracy, trying to acquire land can turn into a legal and political nightmare of protests and court battles that can drag on for years. And that kind of uncertainty absolutely terrifies foreign investors who got used to China's get-it-done efficiency.
Okay, now let's talk about an area where India isn't just trying to catch up, but is actually leading the entire world, and that's its digital public infrastructure. While its physical roads are still a work in progress, India has built a digital superhighway that is the envy of just about everyone. The numbers here are they're staggering.
This is UPI, India's real-time payment system. Back in 2016, it handled about 2 million transactions. Fast forward to late 2023, and it was handling over 21 billion transactions a month. That's more than the US, Europe, and China combined. It's this seamless public system that's brought hundreds of millions of people into the formal economy almost overnight.
But this digital miracle has a pretty dark Black Mirror side to it. The entire system is linked to a mandatory biometric ID for over 1 billion people, which creates this enormous potential for state surveillance. Data security is a huge problem, and maybe most chilling of all, India is the world leader in government-ordered internet shutdowns, just cutting off access for millions with the flip of a switch. It's the ultimate trade-off, incredible convenience, but at the cost of control.
So let's pull the camera back from the domestic scene and look at the global stage. Because India isn't a passive player anymore, not by a long shot. It's really starting to assert itself as a major power, and to do that, it's walking a very, very dangerous geopolitical tightrope.
This quote from India's foreign minister, S. Jaishankar, it just perfectly captures their new strategy. They call it multi-alignment. It's not about being neutral. It's a super pragmatic India-first approach. They're basically saying, we're done being a junior partner to the West. We have a moral duty to our 1.4 billion people, not to somebody else's foreign policy.
But wow, is this balancing act risky? At the exact same time India is getting closer to the US to counter China, it's also become the single biggest buyer of sanctioned Russian oil. And then you have these accusations of it carrying out assassinations in Canada and the US, all of this while a mind-boggling 70 to 80% of its military hardware is Russian-made, a dependency that has now become a huge liability.
And that brings us to the final and maybe most critical piece of the puzzle. We have to look inward. Because the single greatest threat to India's rise might not come from the outside at all. It might come from the deep, dangerous fault lines running right through its own society.
To really get what's happening in India today, you have to understand this one concept, the K-shaped recovery. What it means is that after the pandemic, one part of the economy, the rich, the tech workers, the big companies, their fortunes shot straight up. But at the same time, the other part, the poor, the rural workers, the small businesses, slid even further down. It's creating two completely different Indias living side by side.
And the scale of this inequality is it's breathtaking. Today, the top 1% of Indians hold over 40% of the entire nation's wealth. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a level of wealth concentration that is actually worse than it was under the British Raj.
And this jaw-dropping inequality is just one of 3 massive internal threats. The second is rising religious and sectarian conflict, which risks scaring away all that foreign investment that India so desperately needs. And the third is the climate emergency, which isn't some future problem. It's a crisis right now, with extreme heat and water shortages that threaten to make whole parts of the country unlivable. Which of course brings us all the way back to that one central question. After looking at the people, the factories, the digital code, the geopolitics, and all those internal cracks, is India really the new China?
The answer at the end of the day is no. India is not going to be a replica of China. Its path is just too different, too messy, too democratic. Honestly, the best way to think about it is with this really powerful image. It's 1 billion people, all in a car with no brakes, steering right for the edge of a cliff, and they're all arguing about what song to play on the radio. It perfectly captures the chaos, the incredible potential, and the massive existential risk of this entire experiment.